The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, this is Tom Lane, DM2 Software's Vice President of Sales and Marketing. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's year-end prep webinar. Before I introduce today's presenter, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Because of the number of attendees we have on today's webinar, everyone's phones will stay on mute. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the question window that you see on the lower right of your screen. We'll try to answer everyone's questions at the end of the webinar. If we're unable to get to your question, we'll follow up with you individually after the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded. As soon as the recording is available, we will post it on our website and our YouTube channel. And I will send a message to everybody to let you know when the recording is available to be viewed on the YouTube channel and when the presentation is available to be downloaded from our website. On that note, I would like to introduce Denise Austin, a professional service consultant here at DM2, to give you an overview on prepping for year-end. Take it away, Denise.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everybody. Good morning / afternoon. Most of all, happy Thursday to everybody. And I'm glad, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this with you. So year-end task is something that obviously, being Captain Obvious, we do it once a year. So it's often easy to overlook, and I apologize for the pop-up. It's easy to overlook important considerations. So preparation, that's going to be your key to a successful outcome year after year. So today we are going to look at whether or not a 13 period is right for you, discuss really what that's used for in Sage. We'll look at month-end versus year-end. Then also take a look at period-end and year-end preparation. Module closing, logical order. There is a logical order for your module closing. We're also going to discuss checklists and the importance of them, and discuss payroll and AP reporting changes for 2014 and 2015. And then finally, we'll open it up for any questions that you may have. So the first thing I want to jump right into is the 13th period fiscal year. And where you may have seen this in the past, and when you're setting up your fiscal calendar, you'll notice that there's 13 periods. So typically, what the 13th period accounting is used for is actually used for recording your adjustments that you might have for end of the year adjustments, for instance, having a CPA recommended adjustments. You set that up by, you still are going, and I don't know if everybody's seen this, but I keep getting a message that keeps jumping up at me. You're still going to have it's still going to look at that 52 periods, but it really is the way that you set that up. And the concept, again, is perfect for recording these CPA adjustments, so you can segment those from all other adjustments that you may have. What that's going to do is give you that ability to look at each month truly, month to month, and have a true comparison, and with the knowledge of knowing that you have those 13th period, those other GL adjustments in 13th period. So what you do is you go into your fiscal year maintenance, and you would select first of all the number of accounting periods set to 13, and then you would go ahead and you would start defining what those periods are. Periods 1 through 11 would be typical, the first of the month through the end of the month. But on period 12, putting 12/1 to 12/30, and then the 13th period being 12/31 to 12/31, with the intention of having making all of your year-end adjustments on that date. But I will tell you that the one big caveat is that it is not recommended for any companies that you might be using, if you have multiple companies, that you're using motor fuel tax reporting, because Petrolink doesn't recognize 13 periods. So it will not follow those same rule scenarios. So again, this is, if you have companies, if you have multiple companies and a particular company that does not require motor fuel tax reporting, then 13th period may be something that you might want to consider. So then let's go ahead and now move on to month-end versus year-end. Month-end and year-end processing are accessed by selecting period-end processing on the period-end folder, in the period-end folder for each of the modules. So there is not a different selection. You're still just going to select period-end processing. The module period determines whether it is a period, so the module date, period or date, is going to designate if this is a period-end close or a year-end close. For instance, in this AP example here, we have period ending 11/30. So it knows, because of the way that the fiscal calendar, either the fiscal year calendar is set up, that this is a period end. However, in this next example, you'll see that because we're in period 12, it automatically knows that it's going to be period end and year end processing will be performed. So what does that mean? For period end, what it does when you're doing a period end processing, it clears the period to date balances and moves them to a prior period for all your modules. For year end, it clears the year to date accumulated in the master files. So for instance, year to date in your customers, vendors, inventory, and then it prepares you for a new year. The general ledger year end rolls up the income and expense accounts into retained earnings. And then the payroll year end not only resets the year to date earnings totals, but it also resets benefits. So if you have vacation and sick carryover hours, it will roll those, reset them to 0. It also sets the tax limits and the 401k deposits to limits to 0. So this is a huge, there is definitely a difference between the period end and year end. Year-end closing can be very hectic. There's a lot of things that you need to do in addition to your regular tasks that you do on a daily basis. You need to, what big one is producing accurate financial statements. And so to be able to do that, you have to make sure that everything is up to date. And then you also need to prepare for the new accounting month, and that may be an year as well. So that may mean that you need to create that new fiscal calendar. So to be able to do that, there's a couple rules that we can follow. First of all, make sure that you have a tested backup. And you'll notice that I have an emphasis on tested. Nothing is more frustrating than feeling confident that you have a backup and then go to restore it for some reason if you need it and find that it's not a good backup. It doesn't have the information you need, or you can't access it. So having a tested backup, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Follow the suggested order of module closing. There is a suggested order of module closing, a logical order of module closing, which is going to ensure that things close in the way they need to. Follow checklists. So creating checklists for your group for each module is going to also ensure that everything is going to close without issue. And then create a period in processing team. So that, that's the best practice, that if you don't have one, it's highly recommended that you do create one. And what this team is going to do for your company, they're going to be the guiding forces, I guess, through this process. And so when you're thinking about who you want in that team, it should have operational and accounting personnel. And so once you've defined the team, then creating a schedule that outlines the process and the steps. So to anybody that's responsible for module and GL updates. And even though that it doesn't change from month to month, having that schedule for period end, and then of course having it for year end, it knows, just knowing what needs to be done and knowing that you have the resources to do that is really going to help mitigate some of the anxiety that you might have and help your process to go much smoother. So continuing on, talking about best practices, we recommend that not only do you create this team, but you also have one person that's going to initiate and manage the closing process. So I guess to captaining that team, having that person is certainly going to eliminate or, again, minimize any kind of problems that you may have. And then so following along that process of creating that team, what I've done is giving you an example of a cross-reference by module. So when you're thinking about departments of who you want on that team, try to look at it in a department from a department view. So customer service, they would be responsible for sales order and bill of lading. Inventory control would be inventory management, purchase order and bill of lading. Accounting, of course, would be accounting, accounts payable and general ledger and fuel taxes, and accounts receivable would be card lock and accounts receivable. These departments, so with the manager in each one of these departments could easily be that person on your team, and they'd be responsible for the closing activities related to the associated module. Now, of course, these are just a couple examples of what would fall under here. If you have other modules that aren't listed here, then you would put that, of course, make that expand the list. And not to forget your remote location. So if you do have remote locations, it's ideal to have someone there that's going to lead that process. They would use the same checklist and follow the module closing order that you would use from a corporate level. So continuing with the preparation, you need to make sure that everyone is out of the system. And how do you do that? Well, the easiest way is to open up the Master Console to see who's logged into the system. And Master Console is located in the Library Master, or you can go to File. Actually, you can go to File and see it. You can go to Library Master, access it, or there's an icon at the top of your desktop that allows you to access Master Console. And when you open it, what you're seeing is who the user is, the workstation, the user, and the company code, and what program they're in, right? So if you needed, let's say we had more than just the DM2 user, but there were quite a few, you can actually then use the broadcast option to broadcast to ask everybody to exit. When you are exiting, ask them to not to go to the launcher, but to actually exit out of Mass completely. So let's say that we had everybody exited, but there were a few people still in the launcher. Using the shutdown, you can actually use the shutdown, and it will log everybody off of Mass completely. Using the shutdown for if there's any other login other than launcher or perhaps an inquiry could cause problems. So use that sparingly, and I would say that would have to be used. Would recommend being used by that person who is captaining the closing process. So the module closing order. This sometimes, unless you know what that order is, and maybe sometimes this is what it could look like what order do you do? So this is a really good example of not really knowing what that order is. And what an order logic does, it makes sure that that a module that writes to another module is processed first. So a good example of that is sales order invoices. They post to inventory, and they post to accounts receivable and general ledger. So sales order modules should be closed prior to closing inventory and accounts receivable and ultimately general ledger. So having that order is very, very important. Excuse me. So this is our order of operations, if you will. So what we're going to do is we are going to take a quick look at what that order of closing is. And here is an order of closing. Now, one of the things, it's a logical order of closing, and if you use this logical order of closing, it's going to make sure that everything is written to the modules that they would normally write to. If you notice, the number one task is a system backup, and I probably should have put in system backup and tested system backup. So by having this system backup, you are going to ensure that you have a systematic clean close. If for whatever reason, if somebody got out of order, you can always restore back and start again. If for instance you don't have these modules listed, you can just ignore them. But there are also some modules on here that don't have an actual period end task, but they're on here to remind you, for instance, in bank reconciliation, it reminds you that there might be tasks that you want to complete prior to closing. And then the very last task on here is general ledger. And after you close general ledger, only after everything's been reconciled and all of any adjustments that may be required have been made. So backing up data, how do we back up data? And so basically, when all your current transactions have been finished in every module, everything's done, creating a backup. And the easiest way, the most efficient way, is creating a backup using company maintenance. Creating a company code that represents a backup. And so you're going to go into company maintenance in Library Master to define a new company code, and then selecting copy. Once you select copy, it's going to take you to the copy data screen, and you'll select the source company or your live company that you're backing it up from. So we are going to go ahead, and so once you select that and select proceed, you'll notice when it returns, everything's been copied over. So one other thing that I just want to make a note is that if you choose to use this backup company for your backup for your payroll and 1099s, then you'll want to make sure that you put your federal and state ID and your address information on here, because that is going to be required when you're filing. So that's just an important note to make. So now that you have this copy, one of the things we need to do, and remember in that list that I had, a tested backup. So how do you do that? The easiest way to do that is to log into your backup company code, open up General Ledger, print a GL trial balance, print it summarized, and then go to your live company, print that GL trial balance, and confirm that the numbers match. If the numbers match, then you know that your backup is successful. If you choose to do a couple other tests, you can. But the point that I want you to take away is you need to make sure that that backup is tested. Okay. So let's talk now about checklists. So there's a number of checklists that you can get in the help files in your ERP system. So just by going to period end or going to the resources, you can find your checklist. And ultimately, these are guidelines, so it's something that this is a good starting place, but ideally what you're going to want to do is create your own checklist, but using these as guidelines. What we're going to do is we're going to actually take a close look at a couple checklists that would be, for modules, one being purchase order, another being general ledger. So let's go ahead and look at that purchase order checklist. We're going to divide this in a couple sections. One is going to be our before closing, and so that first one is you want to run that purchase order report and review outstanding orders to make sure that any orders that should be received have been received. So taking a look at that and looking at it with your purchasing or your inventory group is paramount to success. And then making sure if you're finding that there are some orders that should have been received, make sure that that receipt of goods has been done. When you are doing a receipt of goods, make sure that you're looking at that receipt register to make sure it's correct. And then of course, print the daily transaction register and update. After all of the receipt of goods have been done, print all the other period end reports. Now, this is a list suggested by Sage. The asterisk ones are the ones that you really should be printing. The other ones are perhaps maybe not as important to you. For instance, open PO by item, expected delivery recap. There's a cash requirements, but these last three where they're not really, you know, asterisk worthy, I guess. They are interesting. A receipt history report and a purchase history report, that may be one that you want to print. So then so we looked at the pre and now balancing points. It is very important to make sure that we're checking balancing report points. So the balancing report point for purchase order is that purchase is clearing report. And so what you would do is print that and compare that to the purchases clearing non-fuel GL account that's in general ledger. If there are any discrepancies, they need to be corrected before you close. Now, ideally, you're using the end-of-day audit report and you're checking that every day. But if you're not, you should first, number one, implement end-of-day audit, because that is going to tell you every day if you're balanced. But if you aren't, then you may want to consider looking at this sooner than weekly, than once a month. So maybe looking at running this and checking it with weekly against the GL control account. But I want to point out that it is the non-fuel GL account because purchase order has nothing to do with fuel. And then the last and final step here is the closing step. So you would verify that there's no open receipt batches for the month, verify that all GL transactions for PO have been updated, confirm that the PO module date is set to the last day of the month you're closing. This is, and you could insert any module in here. So whatever you're doing, make sure that the module date is the last day of the month. Select period end processing and run the period end year end option. So as you are running that, if you recall when you're processing period end, you get a little screen that comes up and says, hey, you are now processing period 12. If for some reason that does not equal to what you are supposed to be closing, stop. Stop right and then contact whoever your closing manager is. So we just want to make sure that you're reading everything that's coming up on that screen. So tasks, so now I want to talk a little bit about general ledger. So you'd print the reports that you want to print, but there's some other tasks that you want to complete before you close your year in for general ledger. Reconciling AP to the general ledger. Again, if you're using end-of-day audit report, this is something that's happening every day. But if you're not, you want to make sure that all of your registers and journals and the subsidiary modules posting to AP module, for instance, purchase order and job costs have been updated. So PO, job costs, and anything else that would update there. Confirm that all registers, journals, and accounts payable and daily transaction registers have been updated. That's prior. And then use the trial balance to reconcile to the GL AP control account. And the reason why we mention the trial balance in lieu of the AP aging is because the aging report runs on the invoice date. Now, if you're careful, the invoice date would normally be the same date. It would be the date that you're actually posting it in, but the trial balance uses the transaction date, which is what coincides with the GL control account. And then also you could use the GL posting recap report, and what that's going to allow you to do, it lists all the posting to GL from accounts payable module. And so that lets you see if there's any extra postings that were made to general ledger from a module other than accounts payable. So if you do find discrepancies and you need to correct them, If the general ledger is incorrect, AP is correct, but general ledger isn't correct, then you're going to make any of your corrections in general ledger using the general journal entry. If, however, you found that the accounts payable module is incorrect, then there's a couple steps that you need to take. Number one is going to your AP options and disabling for a moment the integration to general ledger, so you can make your corrections to the AP module without updating to GL. And so what that'll do, you'll make those transactions, those corrections, you'll update, and then when it comes time to it'll prompt you to print the journal, and then it'll prompt you to print the daily transaction register. If you say yes, it's not going to print anything, but you can easily say no. And then just don't forget to turn that integration back on when you're finished. The same thing is we would want to also reconcile accounts receivable to general ledger, and it basically follows the same principles as AP. So prior to reconciliation, make sure that everything's been in those subsidiary modules that post to the GL have been updated, sales order, job cost, and others. That any accounts receivable transactions, registers, and journals have been updated, and the daily transaction register has been updated, and then compare that, print the trial balance or use the trial balance to reconcile to your ARGL control account or accounts. And if you need to go a step further, you can also look at the GL daily, or the general ledger posting recap report that's located on the AR trial balance, or the accounts receivable reporting menu. Again, using the AR trial balance is recommended in lieu of the AR aging, because AR aging uses invoice and AR trial balance uses the transaction date. Correcting the discrepancies, the same thing. If a general ledger is incorrect, then you're going to make that general journal entry. If AR is incorrect, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to disable the general ledger flag in the AR option and make your corrections, update, and then turn that integration back on. So when you've done your reconciliations, if you have closing adjustments, you're going to enter those. And if this is a non-motor fuel tax company and you decided to use the 13th period, then you would make them on the last day of that period, so 12/31 in a case of a year, in case of your fiscal calendar being January through December. You're going to generate and post any allocations. If you have allocations set up, then you would make sure you do that. Print your financial reports, and then perform your period end and year-end processing. With the understanding that when we have year-end processing, you are not only you're moving things from current to history, but also with general ledger, it is moving everything out of the from all your income and expenses down up into your retained earnings. So everybody loves the flow chart, so we're going to summarize it by a...
Denise, just to let you know, we're right at the top of the hour. It looks like you're doing fine on time. Just one.
Okay, great. Great. So here's a flow chart that's going to summarize. Confirm if you have a year-end company archived, right? So you're going to make that backup. You're going to make any closing adjustments using the general journal entry. Confirm that your new year is defined in fiscal year maintenance. I think that's probably an issue that I've seen more people run into. It won't let you finish if you don't have that new year. If you're using budgets, create your next year budget. Print your trial balances, financial statements, and general ledger detail reports. Generate your allocations and perform year-end processing. So let's recap. If you're going to do your year-end, first and foremost, confirm that you have your checklists have been completed by your year-end team. Create that backup copy of the company codes you're going to be closing. Confirm that all users are logged out of Sage 100, and you can do that by looking at Master Console. And then proceed with the year-end processing in the module order that we suggested. And by doing that, it follows that logic, and it ensures that the module that needs to write to another one is closed first. So now for this last portion, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about some changes that have been made for payroll and for 1099 printing. We're going to be actually covering these in depth, step by step, on how to do it, how to actually process it in the DM2 Payroll and AP 1099 year-end prep and processing class next week on December 18th. But I'm just going to go over this at a high level. So there's definitely some changes in the year-end processing for these two functions. Several years ago, Sage introduced Atrix as an optional tool to use for W-2 and 1099 processing. Everybody has it who has payroll. You actually, if you don't have access to it, you just need to run it, install it from Workstation Setup. So it is there. You can use it to do your W-2 and 1099 printing. However, one of the things that Sage started last year is they stopped updating the governmental form reports, like 941s and the 940s. And so everybody started to use Atrix to print those. You can either print or use their fee-based filing. So now what Sage is saying is that for tax year 2014, W-2 will be processed by using the e-filing task, excuse me, which is supported by Atrix. And that e-filing task for payroll, that e-filing task is payroll period in, and notice you have federal and state e-filing. You can either print the reports in W-2s only, or you can use Atrix fee-based service to take care of printing the W-2s and mailing them to your employees and filing all of your governmental reporting. There were no tax changes for the fourth quarter in 2014, so we don't need to worry about that. But however, the 2015 quarter one, there are going to be some tax changes in 2015 quarter one. So the TTU, or tax table update, and the 2014 year-end release, or what we call IRD, will be available by download by the week of December 22nd. So it's not ready yet because in true IRS form, they keep changing things. So it will be ready that last week, and the week, probably they're saying the 22nd. It could be as early as the 19th, but they're Sage, when I checked with them yesterday, they said more than likely it's going to be the 22nd. Just go ahead, and then Atrix year-end update, because now we have to use Atrix. It is scheduled to be released on December 23rd. There's nothing to download. It's basically when you are running, if you go on December 23rd and you open up Atrix and you run, for instance, any one of the reports on there, it will automatically it's going to prompt you for going ahead and downloading the update and running it. And it will update everything, including the 2014 tax forms. So forms required. So if you decide that you are not going to use the Atrix e-filing service, you need to purchase the blank perforated 4-up W-2 forms. On the back of those W-2 forms, there was some really, really small writing. So each one of them, so all the disclaimers and disclosures and instructions are already pre-printed on the back of those forms. So again, your options are you do still need to use Atrix. You'll go through the whole Atrix process, and you'll come to a point where you either say, no, I'm going to manually do this myself, or you're going to proceed and let Atrix do that filing service for you. And again, it's fee-based. Also, an exciting thing for Atrix is, as using Atrix, is there's an option to electronically send an email link to an employee for their W-2s. So if you use that Atrix e-filing fee service, you can do that. But there is one step that you have to take before that, and that is your employees would electronically sign a consent form. And what that looks like is that they would receive, when it's time to, when Atrix does distribute the W-2s, they'll either mail them, physically mail them for you, or they'll send a link to that employee, and the link will give that employee, they'll be able to log in, because by establishing that consent form, they would have also established a password, a login and a password. So now I want to just talk a few minutes about the Affordable Care Act. That was coming, it was rumored last year, and the government said, oh, we're not prepared for this, so we're going to wait another year. It is definitely going to be implemented in tax year 2015. So there will definitely be reporting requirements. So what is the Affordable Care Act? If you have payroll, you probably already know this. Employers with 50 or more full-time employees, and it could be a combination of part-time and full-time, will be subject to what the IRS calls the employer shared responsibility provisions. What that is that you, as the employer, are going to be required to track your employee insurance coverage, health insurance coverage by month, and the number of full-time employees for reporting. Right now, we don't know what that report's going to look like because as of December 5th, the IRS really hasn't finalized their reporting. But in order for the ACA reporting to pull the payroll data correctly, you have to have retained perpetual payroll history options set prior to processing your first payroll. Now, the people that I've talked to, our customers that I've worked with, most of them do have that. But if you don't, this is something that you want to check. You want to make sure that you check that you have the retained perpetual payroll history flag set. Again, we don't know what that form's going to look like yet. SAGE doesn't. The IRS says that they've not finalized it. They're thinking that they're going to have it finalized by the first or second week in January. So SAGE has committed to releasing a product update for payroll in March or April, which is going to give the update the necessary fields and everything else in payroll. But for now, what you need to do is just make sure that the retained perpetual history is turned on before you process your first payroll. Also, just a quick 2014 W-2 and governmental tax reporting deadlines. The reason why I wanted to do this is, February 2nd, that's when you have to get it out to your employees, and then your 940 and your 944 to the IRS. But I wanted to point out this, and this may, you have the ability, if you are filing paper formats, so if you opt not to use an e-file format, then you will need to make sure that by the 2nd of March that you have your W-2 filing done to the government, to the federal. Or if you have if you're using the email format, then it will go out, or e-file, I'm sorry, it's going to go out from Atrix on March 31st. And then, of course, I just want to, again, with having the love of flowcharts, you're going to create a payroll year-end company and copy your data. Now, before I showed, when we looked at completely copying your company, that was fine. But a best practice may be for you to have an individual payroll company for year-end, so you can actually go there and reprint W-2s if you need to reprint W-2s. Secondly, print any of your quarterly reports for quarter 4. Print or e-file your W-2 and W-3 forms. You have to, whether you print or e-file, you still need to use Atrix to do that. Print or e-file your quarterly 941s and state tax forms using Atrix. That is the tool that we use. Print any other year-end reports you might have, like a check history report or benefit report, what other reports that you need. And then you're going to perform your period end and year-end processing. When you're done with that, that's when you're going to update your tax tables. And then confirm that that perpetual history flag is on in payroll options. And I just want to talk a second about the tax tables. You want to update the tax tables after you've done your W-2s and W-3s because tax tables are global. So we want to make sure that we don't do it until after this is all finished and your period end and year end is done. So just a quick mention on 1099s. So as in the case of W-2s, Sage isn't going to release any new formats for 1099s. They used to do that in that IRD, but they are going to use Atrix. Again, it's going to be the tool that you will use for 1099 printing. And instead of being in the period end module of accounts payable, 1099 is e-filing and reporting is located in the reports menu. So that's a little bit of a difference than from payroll. You can just as the same with W-2s, you can either print the 1099s or you can use the e-filing service, fee service to process. What they're going to do is they're going to process it, they're going to mail it to the recipients, they're going to file the necessary governmental agencies. So you're pretty well finished. You're done. Whoops, I apologize. Forgot to mute my phone. So if you choose to print your 1099s, you're going to have to purchase the following forms. Again, these blank perforated forms for recipient copies. And I just want to let you know, in the W-2s, the forms have the writing on the back, and they don't have it for 1099s. You can get those blank perforated forms probably at most of your copy at your office copy places, but you will need to print out instructions. There's an option to print instructions for, and then you'll put that in the same envelope with your recipient's 1099 copies. You'll also need to get, and a lot of the packages have the red 1099 and 1096 forms, but if you're buying them individually, you'll need to make sure you have the red 1099 and 1096 forms for the federal copies. And of course, if you are e-filing, you don't have to purchase any of those. So before you finalize your 1099 printing, you want to reconcile those amounts, those 1099 amounts, making sure that they're okay. And you can do that by printing your payment history report and then just do a comparison. There's quite a few other ways, but this is probably the most efficient way. And print them out on, if you want, you can print them out on blank paper and then just take a look at it. You could also write a crystal report, but however you decide to do it, make sure you reconcile them first. This is going to save you from having to go do corrected 1099s later on in the year. And the reporting deadlines, pretty much the same deadlines as with the W-2s. Again, February 2nd being the one to the recipients, but this is, again, the same thing. If you choose paper format, this is your deadline. If you choose to e-file, then Atrix will be doing that for you on March 31st. So that pretty much ends my overview of period end and year end processing. I mentioned that before, at the beginning of talking about payroll and 1099 processing, that we will be having a DM2U class. And we are going to actually go through what it's going to take for those two specific modules. We'll dive into it even deeper as far as what we need to do, prepare for it. Going to walk through the process to install if you don't already have e-filing installed, how to do it. We're going to walk through the process of how to generate W-2s and 1099s. And when we're talking about W-2 specifically, we'll be spending a lot of time on looking at the states that have, or organizations that have local and county taxes and how we make adjustments to that. So then that is pretty much a high level of what those classes are. So if you have payroll and this is something that you want to join, then please do. It's about a 2.5-hour class, and I think you're going to take away knowing how to do it, how to actually process your W-2s and 1099s. That's all I have for you today.
Okay, thank you, Denise. And one thing to point out, if you'd like to register for any of the classes that we're holding, you can do it in a couple of different ways. If you go to our website on the home page, and actually the header of every page, there's a drop-down menu that says, how may we help you? And if you click on that, it'll ask you if you want to register for one of our DM2 University classes. Once you click on that, it'll take you to the full schedule of classes that we have to offer. The other way is you can go in through our events calendar. If you look at our calendar and you open up any one of those events, it'll instruct you how to register for the class. So I just wanted to touch on that. And then for those of you who have attended our previous webinars, we always take this opportunity to put a plug in for next month's webinar. And next month, we'd like to invite you to attend our Sage HRMS Solutions webinar on Thursday, January 15th at 11:30 Pacific, 2:30 Eastern. We'd like you to join us as well as representatives from Sage Software's Employment Solutions Group to learn how Sage HRMS Solutions will help you meet all of your human resource challenges with integrated payroll, benefits, recruiting, employee self-service, and analytic capabilities. Sage HRMS Solutions can help you to maximize every dollar you invest in your employees. And for those of you who are also familiar with the process here, as soon as we finish this webinar, I'll be sending out a copy of this invite to everybody, so you'll be receiving it shortly. Now, if you want to advance to the next slide, Denise, and open it up for questions. And it looks like we have a couple of questions so far. First question is from Kim over at PetroStar. Her question is regarding PO period end. How do you fix items on the purchases clearing report?
How do you fix them? I think, well, it depends on what they are. And actually, there's some reconciliation steps that I'd be happy to, it's pretty in-depth going into it, but I definitely would be happy to share. So we have a reconciliation document that might give some clarity for that. And basically, you have to look at what the transaction is. What happened? Did it get doubled? Did something start with a P? Typically, the biggest issue is that you do a receipt of goods in purchase order, but they don't do the receipt of invoice in purchase order. So when you do a receipt of goods, purchase order AP is updated and purchases clearing is updated. Excuse me, inventory is updated and purchases clearing is updated. When you do a receipt of invoice from purchase order, it actually clears out purchases clearing, and then it updates AP. So that usually is the big problem right there. So if that would be the first place that we would have you look, is make sure that all invoices have been updated or processed through purchase order. There's a flag that you can set also that says whether or not a vendor is a PO vendor, and what that'll do is it'll prompt you if you're trying to enter a invoice in AP invoice, and it'll say, hey, this is a PO vendor, and basically remind you that maybe you don't want to be entering it here. But that usually is the big issue right there.
And Denise, Kim added to her question, she said it was a return of goods that was entered without an invoice number. It's a specific case she's referring to.
Kim, if you could, that's something that we could definitely take a look at. I'd have to think through what that process is. I would imagine it probably follows the same lines, but without seeing the same argument, but without seeing it So return of goods, but there was never an invoice. So the same thing happens, right? It goes into purchases clearing. So how did the invoice get, or the credit for that invoice happen? You know, how did it get processed?
Okay. All right. Next question is from Marie over at Yoder. Marie is asking, which modules can you input the next month's transactions before closing the current month?
Well, best practice is to try and close as quickly as possible. Most of the new business framework modules allow you, they're actually designed by current period, or fiscal year and period. So you could, all of the Sage modules, in fact all of them, you can actually post to the next period without having a problem, without closing a current month. That's not going to be a problem. As far as the DM2 ones, I'd have to get a clear list because I'm not sure, depending on really it depends on what version you're on too. So if you're on version 4.3, then inventory, you're going to have a problem. If you're on version 4.4, then inventory is no longer a problem, but there may be some DM2 modules that you wouldn't want to post. But best practice is to close as quickly as possible.
Okay. All right, the next is more of a comment, and this is from Melissa over at Frost. She's just asking if she can receive a copy of the reconciliation document that you mentioned earlier. And I had actually already made a note. I'll make sure we include that with the follow-up message to let you know
Yes.
the recording and the presentation materials posted on our website. So we'll throw that in.
Yeah, and also the other thing that I'll do is there's a document that we created of year-end processing of reports that you might want to use. Recommended reports, so I'll go ahead and we'll include that as well.
Sure. And here's sort of an FYI comment from Chris over at TexCon. Chris he's saying it's a minor thing, but when I copy a company with the utility, the custom forms don't get copied to the new company.
That's true. It doesn't. Even though it acts like it does not.
Okay.
And it's been that way since 4.4.
Okay, so that's something we can certainly, bring as input to the development team.
Yes.
And then Melissa is asking if there's also any documentation for purchases clearing fuel end-of-day audit.
What, reconciliation? Or setting up end-of-day audit?
I believe it's setting up the end-of-day audits, what she's
so
referring
I think,
to.
Yeah, there is typically what we do is just have one of our consultants help you do that. It's something that should take about an hour of time, but having a consultant walk you through what that process looks like and making sure that you have everything done is going to, again, mitigate any kind of frustration that you might have after you go through the whole process of setting it up. So if you want some assistance, then I would highly recommend just letting one of our consultants help you with that.
Sure, and Melissa just added, she said she's not really looking for the setup information. She's more looking for guidance on how to resolve variances.
So just some reconciliation? Okay. In that reconciliation document, that'll have some ideas.
Okay, great, great. All right, that looks like all the questions we have for now. We're pretty close to the end of the hour here. I would just like to take this opportunity to remind everybody today's webinar has been recorded. Once the recording is available, we'll post it along with a copy of today's presentation on our website and our YouTube channel, and I'll send you a message to let you know when they're available. And as I said before, when I send that follow-up message, I'll include the reconciliation documentation that Denise alluded to there. And I know how it always works. Once the webinar ends, that's when we think of all the good questions. If you have any questions after the webinar or would like to find out more about today's topic, please feel free to email us at sales@dm2.com. Denise, I'd like to thank you for doing a great job. It was obvious you put a lot of prep into that excellent presentation. And I would like to thank everyone for attending today's year-end prep webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.